Hello everyone, it's Elizabeth from the Smart Stitcher. In today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to create a pattern for a moccasin slipper, which looks a little bit like this slipper here. It's one where you can turn the collar down, or if you're feeling a bit cold you can also turn the collar on the slipper up as well. I'm also going to be showing you how I am going to stitch one of these together, and also how to add a sole, a rubber sole, so if you're worried about sort of slipping at all. So that'll be coming up in my next tutorial. But this one is just about creating the pattern. So we are going to be creating a pattern that looks a little bit like this. Don't panic, I'm going to talk you through everything. And then once we have created and drafted our pattern, we'll be transferring it onto card, and our pattern pieces will start to look a little bit like the two that I have here. So we'll be making it to fit your particular foot, and obviously sort of then making sure when we start sewing and cutting out our leather that we get a left and a right as well, because that'll be very important when making a pair of slippers. So let's get into it. My inspiration and part of the method for creating this type of moccasin pattern has actually come from this particular book, Native American Moccasins, a Craft Manual by George M. White. And in it there is a particular pattern. There's lots of fabulous patterns for moccasins, but there is a particular pattern for a hard sole moccasin, and I do apologise if I've got the pronunciation wrong, but I believe this is the Paiute, with a shaped sole and two-piece, and this is sort of giving you the sort of basis of the pattern that I'm going to be creating. But I've had to adapt it because I'm using a much softer leather, but the inspiration has most definitely come from this book. And if you are interested in creating your own sort of moccasin patterns and sort of learning a little bit more about the history, then it's a really good book to invest in. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw around my foot. So I'm stood up and I've got my foot sort of as naturally as it kind of normally sort of sits, and I'm keeping my pencil upright, and I am just going around the outline of my toes and my foot. So keep the pencil vertical all the way around the foot. Just follow the outline of the foot right the way around to the back and down the other side. So make sure that you've gone all the way around. If needs be, go around a couple of times just to make sure that you've got that vertical, nice sort of vertical line. So once I've drawn around, I'm then going to take a measurement of the sort of the nice widest part of my foot. So I'm going to measure down about 2 fingers, and for the purposes of the video, I'm making a mark with a pen to show you my mark, which is going to be about there. Now I'm going to measure around my foot with the tape measure, which I've already popped underneath, and I want to kind of cover over that mark. So I'm just going to take that measurement, and I can see actually I'm still standing as well, so I haven't sort of shifted my weight, that it's not tight, but it's sitting comfortably around my foot at 26 centimetres. So that is my sort of key measurement around my foot that I'm going to need. The next measurement is a little bit sort of going underneath the foot, which is going to be quite helpful for creating the moccasin, as I'll show you. The next measurement I'm going to take is going to go under the foot. So I'm coming up the side of the foot about, say, 3/4 of an inch or 1.9 centimetres. And I'm going to do the same on both sides. So I'm just kind of roughly kind of eyeballing that to get a measurement. I'm sort of marking it with my finger. So it's about 3/4 of an inch or 1.9 centimetres. And then we're going to note that down on our paper. Before removing my foot, I've also just drawn a couple of marks, one to the left of my foot, one to the right, that are kind of almost level with the black mark where I took my measurement earlier, because that's going to help me when I set up my grid in just a moment. So the first thing I've just done is to draw a vertical line along the length of my foot. Now I've sort of roughly kind of eyeballed it to sort of go through the middle of my heel area down here, and I've used a little bit of the gap between my big toe and the toe next to it, just to help me kind of get roughly in that sort of halfway point. it's not going to be exact because we are going to alter the shape of the foot, but we just want a start point. And I often find when I'm drawing patterns that this might be the line that then shifts as I develop the pattern a little bit more, but we need a sort of a start point to anchor our measurements from. The next thing I'm going to do is to draw a line that goes across my foot at approximately 90 degrees to that first line, and I'm just using my quilter's ruler to line everything up. I'm using the marks that we created either side of the foot as a bit of a guide. I suppose it's kind of roughly just over halfway towards the toes, but again we can adapt as we go in a moment. So I'm going to just draw a really long line there. So I've got my 2 lines in, and they are going to form the basis for my pattern. The next thing I'm going to do is to start to refine the shape of my foot a little bit more. So I've just been using a ruler just to help kind of give me a kind of a nice sort of smooth shape, and to kind of where this part of my foot's quite fleshy, I'm just going to sort of straighten that up a little bit and just straighten sort of around the heel, so I've got a really nice smooth shape. And then I'm going to come up to the toes and just start to smooth them off a little bit more. They're going to sort of end up looking a little bit like the toe shape I've got here, but I want to refine that shape and just sort of make it a little bit smoother. So all I'm going to do is to just start to curve from the sort of the outside of the toes and just refine that shape and sort of almost round it, sort of make it that little bit smoother, and that will just give us a nice sort of toe shape to work with. I know that my toes personally can be a bit square, so I just want to kind of give them the best chance to be nice and smooth and nice and comfy in my moccasins. So I'm just going to work into that a little bit more, and then we're going to go through what's next. So I've refined the shape of my foot, and for the purposes of the video I've actually outlined it in black. Now I've used a black felt tip, which means I can't rub the line out, but if you think that might help you with the next stage, then by all means put a sort of a more permanent line in there. But basically that is the shape that we are now going to be working from. The next thing to do is to add on an extra 7mm around the outside of the shape that we've just confirmed. So where my edges were drawn with a ruler, I can so obviously mark that and draw those with a ruler. Otherwise I'm using my ruler just to help get my measurements correct. So I'm sort of working from the outside of my felt tip line, and I am just working my way around and sort of making a little set of marks, and then these marks I can join up with a nice smooth line to create the sort of, in effect, what's going to become the sole of my moccasin. So I will finish that next part, and then after that I'm going to be marking a line that's 1 centimetre to the inside, which is where the rubber sole will sit if you are thinking of applying a rubber sole to your moccasin. So let's get on with those two. Right, we've now got our sort of our key lines in place. I've got the outside line, which is what my sole is going to become. I've got my original foot measurements in black, so that's going to sort of stay there. And I've also measured 1 centimetre to the inside of my sole line, so that I can have some rubber that will actually go on the sole of the moccasin. It won't go right to the edge, but it'll sort of sit just inside of that back of the slipper there, and I've drawn that one in, and that is now kind of ready for when we transfer to tissue paper in a little while. Now we're coming on to the measurements we took earlier. So when I measured around my foot, my circumference was 26 centimetres. So I'm now going to divide that by 2, and I'm going to mark 2 points either side of my vertical line that I have running through the middle of my foot. And if you like, this is going to become point A, and this will be point B. I also divided the other measurement that I took, which was the underneath measurement, where I went under the sole and up a little bit on each side, and that was 13.5 centimetres altogether, which gives me 6.5 centimetres if I divide it by 2, so that I can then split it either side of my line. So I meant 6.75, not 6.5. So let me mark those in as well, because these next points are going to be quite important for us when it comes to drawing up our pattern. So we're going to call this A1 and B1. To help me get the line at the back of the foot in, I'm going to draw another horizontal line, keeping my measurements on the vertical, so everything is nice and parallel there, and I'm literally just coming past, I'm just skimming the very back of the heel, which is just here. So it's just here. I'm going to draw a line, and that is going to help us with our next part. For the next part, our A1 and B1 lines are going to be quite important. We're now going to be creating the part of the pattern which creates our slopes here. So that's what we're going to be looking at next. Now, just to sort of give you a heads up and an idea of where things sit, this, when we've cut it out of leather, will become the opening, and this part, these outside bits, will become the sole, if you like. So this is where this will stitch around here. That center part is the opening, and in order to make sure that we get our opening and our sort of heel in the right position, I like to try and sort of make sure that I've got a kind of almost like a right angle here, so that I know that this will come straight up the leg. But how does that kind of look on a pattern? So when we are drawing our sides in, I'm going to be using my ruler to help me, and I'm going to be using A1 and B1 to help me as well. And what I'm looking to do is to sort of come out, and I can go a little bit wider if I wish, but I don't want to sort of have anything that's too floppy. So I'm just literally sort of picking up the kind of, almost as though my line is going to come off the toe here, and I'm going to use a ruler. I'm going to go through point A1, and I'm going to cross the line that I've just drawn at the bottom. So I've got my first line in, and I'm going to repeat the process, coming off the curve, going through B1 and crossing my line that I've just drawn down there as well. So I'll have a quick check of it once we've drawn, and I can sort of check and I can adjust if I want to sort of bring it out a little bit wider, just to kind of get a nice curve coming off the foot there. Maybe a little bit, yeah, that's better. I'm happy with that. So it's going to look a little bit like that. So we've now got, working from our black line that we drew in with the felt tip, we're getting to sort of start to get a picture of the sort of shape that we are creating. Now the sides that I've drawn in here between A1 and B1 would give me quite a slim fitting moccasin. It wouldn't give me much of a turnover, so it wouldn't give me as much as I have here if I wanted to wear it with the sort of collar section down. If I wanted to make it wider, which I think I do, if I'm honest, I quite like it to be nice and fluffy, I'm actually then going to take my lines a little bit wider. So my lines are actually going to come out to about 13 centimeters either side of that baseline down here. Let me show you the baseline marks. So rather than just sort of skimming through A1 and B1, I'm actually going to be taking my ruler out a little bit wider and making the boot a little bit taller. So I'm just angling to get a nice kind of transition from the curve down into the toes. So I am, at the moment, I'm 13 centimeters either side of my center line, working from my baseline down here, and we're going to make our boot a little bit taller because I think it's quite nice to have a nice sort of turnover. The last two lines to draw in are the very two at the base of the pattern, after we've sort of drawn in our widened sides, and all I'm going to do there is just make sure that this line changes direction at a right angle and then joins that center line that we've drawn there. And I'm going to do the same on both sides. So I just want to line up using my grid, and I'm making sure that this line is parallel to my other lines, and then I'm just drawing across there, repeating with the other side, and everything should match up nice and evenly. You might find with one or two sort of things, and this one is a good example, that you might be kind of a few degrees out. Don't worry about that. If you're more than, say, 45 degrees out, you'll know that something's gone wrong. But we basically want these two lines to meet in the middle, and I like to do a quick check because this line here is going to become the back seam, and I just want to make sure that that is nice and level so that they are the same measurement, and they are actually 13.7, so that when I sew up the back seam I know that that is going to come nice and come together nicely, really, is what I'm trying to say. So the next thing to do is to grab your tracing paper, and we're going to trace off the template. So we're going to do our overall pattern shape that we have just drawn. That's our upper. We're then going to do our outside line for our sole template, and we're going to put that onto tracing paper. And then the last one I'm going to do is a template for the sole, which is this one, that very sort of inner line we drew, which is 1 centimetre from my black line. So that'll become the template for my for the rubber that I'm going to use on the sole of the moccasin. Just wanted to mention 4 extra markings that I've added to the pattern. So when I'm tracing on, I am tracing on the very first line I drew, that vertical line, and then the horizontal line. I'm also adding 4 extra marks, a bit like notches if you're familiar with dressmaking, to help line the leather up when we actually cut out the pieces. So on the pattern I've added a horizontal line just on the outside, just near the little toe where the foot starts to curve. I've added a straight line there. Just down from the big toe where the foot starts to curve, I've added a straight line, a horizontal line there as well. Coming down the foot, on the inside of the foot to where the heel starts to curve, I've added a straight line there, and also coming round the heel and going back up the other side, as soon as it gets straight, I've added a straight line there. Now they are there just purely to help with construction and purely help line pieces up, a bit like keeping in my sort of grid that I drew first of all. And here we have the final pieces all ready on their card, and I've just added a few labels to them. Now I know it's me that's doing them, but I do find it's quite useful sometimes just to add, if I'm making for myself, I'll add my initials, the name of the pattern, moccasin slipper, what piece it is, so this was the upper, the date that I've created the pattern, and also the kind of the side that I'm looking at. So the foot that I drew round was the right foot earlier on, so that's what I have kind of labelled on my pattern pieces. To get the left foot, I would be turning it over. And I've done exactly the same on the remaining 2 pieces, so I know what each bit's called. I've got my sole, I've got my rubber outer sole, I know which view I'm looking at, the right. I've added my initials, I've added the name, and I've added the date, just so I've got those key bits of information. I find personally, if you've watched a lot of my videos, you'll know this, that I like to create a mock-up and then create, sort of amend my kind of master pattern that I've got now in front of me. So I sort of, this particular style of slipper started out looking a little bit more like this as I started to get to grips with the pattern and adapting the pattern for the types of leathers that I would be using. So always make a prototype to test. It's going to also depend as well a little bit on the shape of your foot and the leather that you're using, and perhaps the adjustments and allowances that you'll need to make to the pattern. But always, always, always make your mock-up, if you can, in something similar to that which you're going to be using for your final piece, and then adjust your pattern accordingly. So don't cut into your lovely leather that might be a little bit more expensive if you know that you're just testing something. So always do a mock-up first. So next time we'll be on to the making.